If you didn't already know, inflation is the reason that people get poorer and poorer every single year. And in this video, we're going to understand inflation and how you can beat it. So, over the last few years, in the UK, the average inflation rate has been roughly around 6%. So, if you don't get a 6% or more wage rise each year, that means that you're getting poorer. You can buy less with your wages than you could the year before. Now, the government does quote the likes of 6%, 9%, 2.1% inflation rates, but we all know way higher than that. And you can see it anywhere that you look. The price of fuel, the price of building materials, the price of food, it's closer to 20, 30, 40, 50% inflation rate. That is where they skew the numbers a bit. That's why it's a selected basket of goods that they choose inflation from. And that basket changes over time. If they were to keep the same basket over time, you would get a better idea of what inflation truly is. But they cherry pick that basket to make it as less severe as possible. So that is why you get poorer every year if you do not get a wage increase that beats the inflation rate. But in this video, we're going to show you exactly how you can beat that inflation rate. So I'll give you the official story on inflation, the official excuses for inflation, but I'm going to tell you the reality that they don't tell you in universities, that they hide in universities, and they actually go as far as saying that inflation is a good thing in universities. But we're going to debunk it in this video, and we're going to tell you exactly how you can beat inflation and not be like the majority who get crushed every single year and get poorer and poorer and poorer at the hands of inflation. So inflation is a gradual loss of purchasing power that is reflected in a broad rise of prices for goods and services over time. The inflation rate is calculated as the average price increase of a basket of selected goods. Now, that is part of the scam, let's say, because they cherry pick which goods to use in that selected basket of goods and services over 1 year. High inflation means that prices are increasing quickly, while low inflation means that prices are growing more slowly. Inflation can be contrasted with deflation, which occurs when prices decline and purchasing power increases. So inflation measures how quickly the prices of goods and services are rising. Inflation is classified into three types: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. Most commonly used indexes are consumer price indexes and wholesale price indexes. Inflation can be viewed positively or negatively depending on the individual viewpoint at the rate of change. Those with tangible assets may like to see some inflation as it rises the value of their assets. So let's now understand inflation, and I think this is where it can get misconstrued, let's say. An increase in the money supply is the root of inflation. Now, this is 100% true. This is also the only root of inflation. The only reason inflation takes place is because of money supply, money creation. That is it. There is one reason for inflation. Now, if you look at the news, any media outlet, when they speak about inflation, it's everything else other than money printing. Now, money creation, money printing is the sole and only reason. But in the news, they will say Putin's oil is causing inflation, the war in the Middle East is causing inflation. They will give you every single reason except the only true reason, which is money printing. So this can play out through different mechanisms in the economy. A country's money supply can be increased by the monetary authorities by printing and giving away money to its citizens, legally devaluing or reducing the value of the legal tender currency, and loaning new money into existence as reserve account credits through the banking system by purchasing government bonds from banks on the secondary market. It's all a big fugazi. So other causes of inflation include supply bottlenecks and shortages of key goods, which can push prices to rise. This is true. For instance, it can happen on a much smaller scale. The inflation we see on a day-to-day basis in our lives every day is only caused by money printing. But of course, there is some instances where if an item is in high demand, let's say you're on a sinking ship and there is only one life vest, that life vest becomes so much more valuable. People will just continually bid it up, bid it up, bid it up as much as possible because it's so valuable in that moment that they'll pay anything for that. So that is how inflation can occur in other situations, but in the day-to-day life, bread, milk, etc., that isn't caused by a new surge in demand in milk, a new surge in demand in bread. It's caused by money printing, and that's it. Now, another funny one that the media tried to portray a while back in the UK was that there was a massive shortage of fuel in the UK, and this caused a massive surge. Everyone was panic buying fuel and the prices were going up. A few weeks later, it was all forgotten about. There was no shortages anymore, but everything was back to normal again. But I think maybe that's another video in itself on that topic. So when inflation occurs, money loses its purchasing power. This can occur across any sector and throughout an entire economy. The expectation of inflation itself can further sustain the devaluation of money. Workers may demand higher wages and businesses may charge higher prices in anticipation of sustained inflation. This, in turn, reinforces the factors that push the prices up, so it becomes a vicious circle. Now, the famous way to gauge inflation is by the price of a Freddo. Back in the day it was 5p, now it's 30p, I think, maybe. The Freddo hasn't changed. The currency that the Freddo's valued in has decreased drastically. This is why back in the 1960s you could buy an average UK house for around £3,000. Now today, in this current market, the average price of a UK home is around £280,000. Now, that house hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed in that scenario is the purchasing power of the underlying currency that you're buying that house with. And that is what we see across everything, across every single thing that we buy. The purchasing power of our currencies is destroyed over time by inflation. Okay, so now we understand inflation a bit more. What is ways that we can beat it? How can we defeat inflation? How can we not fall victim to inflation and get poorer over time and instead get richer over time, get more wealthy over time? The only way that you can get more wealthy is by beating inflation year on year and increasing your purchasing power year on year. So firstly, we can increase our income year on year. So if inflation next year is going to be 10%, that means we need to earn 10% more than we did before. So let's say you earn £40,000 a year, inflation is going to be 10%, that's going to be £44,000 that you're going to need to earn next year. You've got a £4,000 deficit there. So how can we beat that? You can increase your income. So if you're currently in a job now, how can you increase your income? You could ask for a wage rise. Now, a lot of people don't actually do this. They don't just ask for it. I think in the US, people are more open and they would happily ask for things like that. But in the UK, I think the culture's a bit different and people don't really want to ask. But if you feel that you're doing a job, a good job, and you should be paid higher, ask for a wage increase. Ask even just to beat inflation by 1%. All you can do is ask. All they can do is say no. So let's say they say no to the wage rise. What can you do? You could ask for more hours. Now those more hours, can you make up £4,000 extra over the year to make sure that you're beating inflation that year? So let's say your boss said no, can't give you a wage rise, can't give you any extra hours. What do you do next? What I would do in that situation, I would get a side hustle. So side hustle, earn some money online. You should easily be able to make up that £4,000 deficit over the space of a year. Now I don't have time to cover it in this video, but if you want to see other videos on how you can make money online, subscribe to the channel. I will be posting more on side hustles on the channel where you can earn a bit of extra income alongside your full-time job. Number 2, we can invest in stocks or funds. So another way we can beat inflation is by investing. Investing is the only escape because, as we discussed previously, people who do like inflation is those who hold assets, those who are invested in assets, because the prices of those assets that are invested in, those inflate. So how can you beat inflation? You can be holding assets. So number 2, investing in stocks and funds. Since the stock market's inception, over the years, it always tends to outperform inflation. So by parking your money outside of your bank account and into the stock market, let's say, there's a good chance over time that you're going to beat inflation. So in 2021, this is absolutely hilarious. The UK government quoted that inflation was 2.5%. I'm struggling to hold in my laugh, to be honest. That is a disgrace for even trying to claim that. But anyway, yeah, the UK tried to claim that inflation was 2.5%, maybe 25%, but yeah, they claimed 2.5%. But in that same year, the S&P 500 returned 26%. So inflation is 2.5%, but the S&P 500 returned 26%. So according to the government figures, you're outperforming inflation by 23.5%, because at the end of the day, it's all just a numbers game. That's what finance is. In the simplest form, you just need to be at a higher number than inflation to win. Gamify it. I want to beat the number of inflation by X amount. Simplify it, gamify it, and it'll become a lot easier. And over time, if you're consistently beating inflation, that means you're consistently getting wealthier. If you're underperforming inflation, if you're getting eaten up by inflation over the years, that means that you're getting poorer and poorer every single year. Next on the list, we have investing in property. So much like stocks and other assets, property over time always goes one way. The example earlier of the average house price being £5,000, now it's £290,000. That chart is only going one way, and it's up. And the reason for that is because inflation. The more money they print, the higher the cost of the asset. That is just the way it goes. So if you can park some of your money in property, there's a good chance over the next 2, 5, 10 years, you're going to beat inflation. And at the end of the day, that is the goal. You just need to beat inflation to be winning the game. Next on the list, we have the oldest currency in the world. We have gold. Now, gold has been the inflation hedge of the past 100 years. Unlike the pounds and the dollars that we use that can be inflated to infinity, the purchasing power can be destroyed over time. Gold is the opposite. It's a limited supply asset, so that means you can't just create gold out of thin air like you can do with pounds or dollars. So over time, gold tends to outperform inflation. So in the UK from 2013 to 2023, the average inflation rate has been around 2.9%. Now again, it's government figures, government quoted figures. Whether you believe them or not, I definitely do not believe them, but that's what they say anyway. They say average inflation rate over the past 10 years is 2.9%. Now, on the other hand, gold over the past 10 years in that same period has got average returns of 11% per year. So that means that every year over the past 10 years, if you'd invested in gold, rather than just saving your money in cash, if you parked the same money in gold, you would outperform inflation. And then finally on the list, we have the king, the outperformer of the century, the biggest outperformer of all time. And that some people might not like this, some people might not be aware, but Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the inflation destroyer. Inflation is what makes Bitcoin so powerful. Inflation is what makes Bitcoin so valuable, because people who are scared of inflation, people who understand inflation, they flock to Bitcoin. Now, the dollar, the pound, the euro, all of these currencies can be created out of thin air by central banks. And because it's so easy for them just to create out of thin air at the click of a finger, this means that those currencies that they create devalue at a rapid pace. The purchasing power of those currencies tank year on year. But on the other hand, Bitcoin, similar to gold, some people like to think of Bitcoin as being a digital gold. Bitcoin is a limited supply asset, and unlike gold, we know exactly how many Bitcoin there is in the world. We know exactly how many Bitcoin will ever exist, and it's 21 million. Now, although gold is physical, gold is the king of old money, Bitcoin is the king of new money. And not only does Bitcoin outperform inflation year on year, it also sets new records year on year for being the best performing asset in the world. Bitcoin outperforms property, it outperforms gold, it outperforms the stock market, it outperforms everything. Bitcoin is the best performing asset of the last decade, and year after year it continues to set new records. So for me, I've been investing in Bitcoin since 2017, and year on year I beat inflation by investing in Bitcoin. Now, nothing in this video is financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I disagree with some of the official quoted figures, but what do I know? I'm just a random guy on the internet. But if you're interested in any of those methods, like stocks, gold, Bitcoin, there's links down below, some of the places that I use to buy those assets. And if you want to learn more about how to protect the wealth that you generate in crypto through Bitcoin, check out this video here and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.